Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. A few weeks ago I made a video on the line of English and then British monarchs and how each one in turn managed to arrive on the throne. In the comments beneath that video I was asked about King John and particularly about his reputation. Just why is he commonly known to history as bad King John? So that's the question we're going to be exploring today. Let's go. I don't know about you, but I first met John through Disney's Robin Hood. In that film, he is presented as a greedy tyrant, despoiling his brother Richard's throne, while that hero king was away fighting during the Crusades. But Disney's Prince John would never be one to fight because he is quite clearly a coward. Although a lion, just like his brother, John has no mane because he is emasculated. He cries about his mother favouring his brother and he sucks his thumb while tugging on his ear. The crown and robe of kingship fit him poorly, he's simply too small for them. His companions in villainy are the yellow-eyed wolf known as the Sheriff of Nottingham and the hypnotic, mind-controlling snake Sir Hiss. We're never shown Prince John becoming king because his brother, replete with thick mane and barrel chest, returns to set his kingdom to rights. Prince John and his cronies are imprisoned for their crimes against the king and his people, especially their crimes against the poor. Justice is served. Bad Prince John seemingly never becomes the bad king of legend. William Shakespeare, riffing on the chronicles of his day, brings his audience another portrayal of King John. For Shakespeare, John is a man who found conflict everywhere. According to Shakespeare, King John had, quote, done a rape upon the maiden virtue of the crown. When the French attempt to push the claim of John's nephew Arthur as one that was superior to his own, John goes to war with them. John angers the church by refusing to acknowledge the new Archbishop of Canterbury and by speaking out against the Pope. For this, he is excommunicated. He orders the assassination of his nephew and rival claimant. John's nobles turn against him. For Shakespeare, John's kingship endangers the security of England. His actions threaten to cause his nation to be invaded and permanently subsumed by another monarchy as people defect to the cause of the French Dauphin, Louis. The threats only dissipate with the death of King John by poison. At once, internal strife and conflict is set aside, and the nobles of England unite in allegiance behind John's son, Prince Henry, who is now King Henry III. In 2017, Dr. Lane Sobrad wrote an article for Medieval Warfare called Hating John, How English Chroniclers Portrayed the King, in which he, among other things, collates a series of quotes from The Great and the Good regarding the reputation of King John. So, we have A. Milne, quote, King John was not a good man. Sir Walter Scott accuses him of having a licentious and tyrannical disposition in Ivanhoe. Kate Norgate felt that he had shown, quote, superhuman wickedness through his tax policies. William Stubb said of John's death, John had thus ended a life of ignominy, in which he had no rival. Sir James C. Holt said, few men have ensured so effectively that those who were not for him would be against him, while W. L. Warren felt he had the mental abilities of a great king, but the inclinations of a petty tyrant. So, the reviews are in, and it seems like King John is quite the royal flop. But what is actually known about his life and how he lived it? John was the youngest son of King Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine. His exact date of birth is contested, and a bracket of Christmastide is offered, which is between the 25th of December 1166 and the 6th of January 1167 when it comes to John's potential birth. John is famed for being his father's favourite son. By the time John was in his early teens, he had acquired the nickname Lackland. Some say his father was the one who gave him this name. But rather than making a mockery of his place as the youngest son, who was thus set to inherit no land, if it was Henry that gave him the name Lackland, it seems that it was actually his way of using it as a prompt, something that the king wanted to remedy, a situation that displeased him. Indeed, previously, in 1173, Henry II had decided that John, who was aged around 6, should have Chillon, Loudun and Mirabeau for his own, which enraged his eldest surviving brother Henry, who was known as the young king. Henry II was jealous when it came to his grasp on the reins of power, a fact that enraged John's elder brothers and mother. The boys, excluding John, rebelled against their father with their mother's support. This rebellion would, however, be suppressed within the year. On the 30th of September 1174, when John was 7, he received grants that would earn him £1,000 from England and 1,000 livres each from Normandy and Anjou annually. The next year, the heirs of the Earl of Cornwall were disinherited, as Henry II reserved the use of the Earl's estates for John. Those heirs then rebelled. Then the year after that, so we're now in 1176, so John's around 9, he is betrothed to Isabella of Gloucester in such a way that her sisters and their husbands were disinherited from the estates of their recently deceased patriarch, William, Earl of Gloucester. Within months, in May 1177, King Henry II named John as King of Ireland, and he asked the Pope of the day, Pope Alexander III, to give him a crown. John's place as his father's favourite seems pretty evident, doesn't it? I mean, he is getting all of the things, isn't he? But I think it might be worth remembering just how young he was while his father was piling all of these gifts upon him. Ultimately, the control of the estates and the control of the funds that were handed to John were actually more likely in the controlling hands of his father. That doesn't mean he wasn't his father's favourite, but maybe part of that favour was down to the malleability of his youth when compared to his elder brothers, whose willingness to rebel acts in contrast. John would not always be a boy, though. When he was 17, his father commanded that Aquitaine, which was John's mother's ancestral lands, be transferred to John. At the time, the recognised Duke of Aquitaine was John's older brother Richard. In fact, by this point, in 1184, he was the eldest surviving brother, as Henry the young king had died of dysentery the previous year on the 11th of June 1183. As it was, Richard was not in a giving mood. So, Henry II supported John and his other son Geoffrey to attack Aquitaine in order to make good on John's claims. Well, I guess if the children are fighting each other, they aren't fighting their father. Richard, however, held Aquitaine, and by the December of the same year, Henry II appears to have come to terms with that. His 3 surviving sons were summoned to court, but the issue of John and Aquitaine appears to have been put to bed. Then, in March 1185, King Henry II knighted John and dispatched him to Ireland with an impressive and well-armed military force to secure the submission of the Irish lords. John had wanted to go crusading, but his father had refused him. According to reports, John's management of the Irish campaign was underwhelming, with his arrogance and greed often being positioned as defining factors of his character and leadership. Defeats and desertions were the order of the day, and by the September, John was back at home. 2 years later, in 1187, Jerusalem fell. John was really keen to take up the cross and to go crusading with his last surviving brother, Richard, because Geoffrey had died the year before in the August of 1186. As it was, Henry II refused to allow his youngest son to go on crusade. Things began to unravel when John's brother Richard went on to form an alliance with his fellow crusader, the French King Philip. And this was following his father, Henry II's public refusal to name Richard as his heir in November 1188. In this act, Henry II had gone too far, and his eldest son began to get aristocratic support. Then, Le Mans fell on the 12th of June. Eventually, Henry II had to concede that he was defeated, at which point he learned that John, his favourite son, had switched sides to support Richard against him. Some say that this news was enough to kill Henry. Sure enough, he would not live long. King Henry II died on the 6th of July, 1189. He was 56 years old. John's brother Richard was now king, and on the surface at least, John was in a position of trust and authority. He was allowed to hold his position as Lord of Ireland, and Richard ensured that his brother received a collection of estates that had been promised to him by their father Henry II. More gifts of land were to follow. However, in 1190, Richard also made John promise to stay out of England for 3 years while Richard was off crusading. So, I think we can probably question just how far he actually trusted his brother. As it was, John only kept that promise for a year before returning to England and, almost at once, falling out with the person that Richard had left in charge while he was away fighting, William de Longchamp. John was perhaps understandably miffed that William was willing to recognise Arthur, the son of John's brother Geoffrey, as Richard's heir should Richard die without issue. With that being said, it is worth mentioning that within the rules of primogeniture, the sons of John's elder brothers, which Arthur was as Geoffrey was John's elder brother, should and would have the superior claim to John. In this conflict, sieges happened, castles changed hands, and tensions ramped up. William and John would ultimately meet at Winchester in July 1191, and William would capitulate by recognising John as his brother's heir presumptive. But John would not rest. He wanted William gone, and he was prepared to put the pressure on. Accusations of corruption, coupled with veiled threats of violence, resulted in William's resignation on the 10th of October. But John, however, still wasn't finished, because by February of 1192, John was making plans to defect from his brother in order to join up with Philip of France, who had fallen out with Richard while the pair were on crusade. Philip offered John the Angevin lands and his sister's hand in marriage. This was despite the fact that since 1189, John was already married to his betrothed from earlier, Isabella of Gloucester. His willingness to consider another bride will, however, not be a one-time thing. It took John's mum, Eleanor of Aquitaine, to talk him down from this plan of rebelling against his brother and risking everything he had. Near the beginning of the next year, 1193, word reached England that Richard had been captured while he was returning from the Crusades and that he was now being held for ransom in Germany. John took the opportunity of this misfortune of his brother to finally ally himself to Philip in order to rebel against that brother. This attempt was, however, only supported by those who were paid to be there. John was marked out as a villain and a traitor. By taking up arms against this crusader king, who was also his brother, John did not cover himself in glory, and the rebellion failed. The brothers were almost brought to terms through a treaty of July 1193, which would have enabled John to keep his lands if he contributed to the ransom that would free Richard. But when those holding John's castles in Normandy refused to hand them back, John threw his toys out of the pram and teamed up with Philip once again. Now, all of John's lands were declared forfeit, and this happened in May 1194. But at that point, Richard was free and he was on his way home, so John turns coat again. He abandons Philip and he goes directly to his brother to beg for forgiveness, and that forgiveness was granted. John behaves himself for the next few years. He slowly regains his brother's trust. Clearly, he does enough creeping and crawling, as it is thought that Richard named John as his heir in the early part of 1199. Helpfully for John, Richard would die soon afterwards, on the 6th of April 1199. So, we've arrived at the period of kingship. However, I don't know about you, but I think he's been pretty morally questionable so far. So much so that even if he underwent a total personality transplant as soon as the crown was popped on his head, I can see his reputation being dented by all the stuff he did previously. But let's not prejudge. Let's look at the kingship portion of the story. John was 32 years old when his elder brother died, and despite being most likely the successor named by his brother, the former king, he would still have to secure the throne. And there was still that rival claimant, John's nephew Arthur. John's marriage to Isabella of Gloucester was now, apparently, insufficient for the demands of his new position, so he had it annulled by some tame bishops in 1199. The following year, on the 24th of August 1200, he married another Isabella, the daughter of the Count of Angoulême. This Isabella would have been around 12 years old. In honouring his new marital ties, John would end up insulting the powerful Lusignan family by confiscating castles and estates from them and granting some of those confiscated castles and estates to his new father-in-law. Additionally, Isabella had previously been betrothed to Hugh, the Count of Lusignan, so the offences were greater still. The Lusignans sought justice through the court of France, to which John was duly summoned, but where he refused to attend. Philip of France responded by confiscating John's fiefs in April 1202 and by accepting the homage of Arthur. So, Philip is actively showing public support for John's rival to his throne. Then, the French king seized the opportunity to invade eastern Normandy. Anjou was also under threat, and John's mother Eleanor was unable to defend her son's dominions as she was trapped at Mirabeau by her grandson Arthur and the Lusignans. John, however, used this to his advantage. He sped to his mother's side, and this enabled him to capture his rivals and the nobles that were supporting him. In relation to these captives, it was rumoured that, quote, he kept his prisoners so vilely and in such evil distress that it seemed shameful and ugly to all those who were with him and who saw this cruelty. Indeed, it is believed that a number of the prisoners died because of the poor conditions in which they were being kept. And to make matters worse, Arthur's fate is unknown. It is thought that he died in around 1203, when he would have been 15 or 16. One thing that is for sure is that John gets the blame for his death. Some allege that he killed the boy while in a drunken rage. Others say that he commissioned someone else to assassinate him. But if there is one thing that we can learn from history, it's that uncles who are thought to have been involved in the deaths of their nephews tend not to be well thought of. Opposition tends to galvanise against people who are accused of such things. Some might say that God and or fortune will turn their backs on so depraved a person. Whether human or divine, John's military luck does seem to have run out on the continent. By 1205, John had lost both Normandy and Anjou. In the aftermath of these great losses, John developed an even greater reputation for greed and heavy taxation. And this happened across the social order. No one was apparently safe from his grasping ways, it seems. The 13th century Barnwell Chronicle described John as the plunderer of his subjects. At the start of 1207, the Archbishop of York protested against another tax being levied by John, and he left the country because of it. John responded by confiscating all of the temporalities of York, so proportionate as ever there. John's falling out with the clergy then went up a notch when he decided to take on the Pope over who should fill the role of Archbishop of Canterbury. And when the Pope sought to enforce his candidate, John seized the Canterbury estates and exiled the monks. Pope Innocent III issued an interdict against John in March 1208, and continuing in his proportionate way, John responded to this by confiscating all clerical property. King and Pope attempted to negotiate, but seemingly neither could nor would give sufficient ground to the other. So John found himself excommunicated in November 1209, and this leads the English bishops to head into exile. Any concern that John may have had for the immortal souls of his people, or even himself, appears to have been overridden by the profits he obtained from all the vacant ecclesiastical bishoprics and abbacies. In short, excommunication suited John's coffers very well. But John wanted more. Namely, he wanted to reclaim those continental possessions that he had lost a few years earlier. The campaign of 1214 intended to achieve this was, nevertheless, an expensive disaster. John ended up depleting his hoard of wealth, and he left himself incredibly vulnerable. The king's military embarrassment, when coupled with his continuingly harsh taxation, created a powder keg ready to explode. By 1215, the nation was on the brink of civil war. Many of John's magnates were demanding reform. John attempted to bring them to heel. Then he tried to subvert and slip out of honouring any of their demands. On the 4th of March, he even took the cross as if he was planning to go on crusade, and this did win him some brownie points with the Pope, who spoke out in John's favour against his rebellious magnates. Now, I think the cynical amongst us might see that this support might have been John's motivation for taking up the cross in the first place. As it was, he was ultimately left with no option but to confirm and seal the charter that was put before him at Runnymede on the 15th of June. That charter was the Magna Carta. However, by the middle of the next month, John was appealing to the Pope to annul that charter that he had sealed. And at the start of September, the papal bulls that excommunicated the rebels against John's kingship arrived. John took this as an invitation to deal violently with those who had opposed him. He began by besieging Rochester Castle, at which point the rebel lords invited Philip's son Louis to invade and seize John's throne. In October, Alexander II, the King of Scots, received the homage of the Northerners who were massing against John's kingship. Wales also came out against John, and Llywelyn the Great was established as the de facto Prince of Wales. England's traditional strongholds in Wales were captured for this cause. However, Rochester Castle surrendered to John on the 30th of November. But in the December, French troops loyal to Louis had arrived in London. John wasn't there. He was busy wreaking havoc in the north when those French troops arrived. He'd followed the northern rebels into Scotland and had captured Berwick on the 13th of January 1216, which is an incredibly significant win. After which point he started to move back south. He took Colchester in the March of 1216, and he was in Kent by the April, awaiting the full French invasion. Despite the Pope commanding him not to, Louis made land at Sandwich in Kent on the 22nd of May. Rather than stay and fight, John travelled west, which allowed Louis to scoop up some tactically useful locations. Then the earls began to submit to him. The Scots king met him at Canterbury to do his homage to him as his feudal overlord and King of England. Although Louis and his invasion was not universally accepted, the French prince had won the support of the majority of the most powerful barons in the realm, and they were joined by a number of John's knights and other servants of the crown. By the middle of October, Louis's invasion looked like it was about to make a decisive move, as Dover Castle appeared to be on the verge of capitulating to him. On the night of the 9th to the 10th of October, John became ill with suspected dysentery. Nevertheless, he struggled on. While he was travelling, he misjudged a tide, and as such, he lost part of his baggage train in an area called the Wash. Some claim that the baggage in this case included the crown jewels of his day. Just over a week after he fell ill, during the night of the 18th to the 19th of October, 1216, King John, aged 49, died. According to Matthew Paris, the 13th century chronicler, there were those who asserted that, quote, "Foul as it is, hell itself is made fouler by the presence of John." Matthew Paris is also credited with accusing John of offering to convert to Islam in order to obtain military aid, but the veracity of Paris's claim in this regard is increasingly being questioned. John left a 9-year-old son, Henry, behind, who he intended to rule after him. And I think we can agree that this boy has been left in a fairly precarious position. However, if you watched my video on the line of monarchs that I mentioned at the start of this video, then you will probably remember that I made no mention of a King Louis. After King John came the rule of his son, King Henry III. In 1217, in the face of military stalemate and a few defeats, Louis accepted a bribe to go away. And to prevent further strife and reprisals, Henry III's regent, William Marshal, enacted a policy of lenient treatment for those who had taken up for Louis. Maybe I'm being unfair, but John does come across as a fairly unpleasant figure. He's grasping, at best morally ambiguous, and is certainly highly reactive. He was a conflict magnet, someone who had disputes of varying degrees of severity with his father, his mother, his siblings, his nobles, his clergy, the Pope, the Welsh, the Scots, and the French. In short, it would probably be quicker to list the people he didn't fall out with than the ones that he did. So I'm led to wonder if the greatest thing that he did for his son was dying while that boy was still young enough to need a regent. It was a boy king whose rule could be managed and shaped by the magnates of the land just a more attractive proposition than being ruled by Louis the Invader. So, did John's early death actually shore up his son's rule? And what might have happened if John had lived? So, what do you think of those questions? Of the life and legacy of King John? Does he deserve his terrible reputation? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comments section underneath this video, or you can find me on social media. I'll leave links to the other places you can find me on the internet in my description box. Follow me over on some or all of them so we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, why not share it with your friends? Please also let me know you liked it by hitting the thumbs up, and please subscribe to the channel. You can also hit the bell icon beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop down so that YouTube tells you when I've next uploaded. I hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.